Before we start the debate, just a few house rules. Please keep your talking to a minimum. If you need to exit the room, please only do so in between speeches. If you do have a headphone, please make sure it's on silent mode. Yeah, that's about it. On the motion, I'd like to invite the Prime Minister to start the debate. Here.
I put my phone in airplane mode first. Sorry.
Why are you flying? Oh, he's about to take a high joke.
Mr. Speaker, let me start off with a dialogue, okay, of what will happen at a regular mosh pit concert, okay? Oh my gosh, this Iron Maiden concert is wonderful. It is going crazy. Oh my gosh, everyone's trying to jump. Okay, let's get into it, okay? Oh my gosh, what's happening? I'm stuck right in the middle, okay? And then suddenly, now dialogue's over, and everything goes crazy, everything goes mad. Let me tell you the story of mosh pitting, okay? Now, this starts off as a normal jumping motion, okay? For all of you who don't know, it starts off as a jumping motion, and pushing comes into action, and this slowly elevates, okay, into a more violent sense of action. We start pushing people even harder, kicking, and at its highest peak, it starts going towards fighting. Now, the punk rock scene, which has evolved into an aggro rock scene, and an aggro rock scene means a violent punk rock band. Now, these things have escalated into a violent state of mode. Now, punk rock bands are collecting a group of individuals and creating firms, and firms meaning gangs. And gangs, they come out for a concert and they fight. They fight so that the concert would look more popular, would look more impressive. And I'll get to this later on. Talk to you guys about the mechanism. No, thank you. We're gonna talk about how we're gonna solve this problem. We are going to remove and we are going to eliminate mosh pits from all concerts and events. No mosh pits of any variety, such as the Wall of Death, no thank you, such as the Wall of Death or the spinning cyclops, which means you hold two people and you just jump around, okay, will not be allowed to be in any concert or an event. Now, the reason why this is, no thank you, why this is principally justified, okay, I have three arguments on this. Firstly, argument one is the third-party harm it causes. Now, no thank you. The third-party harm. Now, other people are affected by this, okay? Now, based on the information that was given, drugs was an issue. Drugs was an issue, fighting was an issue, violence was an issue. Now, people that go there for the concert, for the music, okay, they go there for the event, for the art form. Now, they are affected by the use of drugs, by the use of violence in these events. Now, tell me, how does society as a whole benefit from this based on the cultural aspect of it in music? No thank you. Music, art, peer pressure. Now, I'm going to direct you guys to FMFA 2014. Now, no thank you. The Ministry of Youth and Sports had banned this concert from happening only one day after, because they used the fighting, the mosh pits, and the drug abuse was too much. 12 people died there. Take that into an account. No thank you. Now, how does this reflect on the younger generation? How does this affect our younger people that are seeing that, oh, my older brother, my brother's friends, they are all going into concerts and they have a gang, they have a mosh pit. Now, what about this? What about this? What? Oh, drugs. All right, is that a good thing? They say it's a good thing. How is this reflecting our younger generation? Now, that is why we think that it is good to eliminate these kind of things from happening, because it does not reflect how we want our concerts and events to be in our country. Now, no, thank you. Now, second argument, we're talking about the harm it causes towards the recipient itself, the person who joins these gangs, no, thank you. The person that joins these gangs, the person that comes and says, all right, let's go and take drugs. All right, let's go. All right. Now, firstly, this will not help them at all. The fact that we, as the government, are allowing them and not putting any ban on this is harming them in a way. Now, based on this, I'm going to go into my third argument, because the government has no, thank you. The government has a responsibility towards its people. Why ban the use of drugs in the first place? Because it causes harm. Why force seat belts on people and passengers, drivers and passengers alike? Because no, thank you. Because it causes harm. Now, even if they did, no, thank you. Yes, please.
Those actions that you're talking about are rampant and are induced by drugs. Why can't you still have these mosh pits that and introduce regulations to ensure that people don't indulge in illegal activity?
Yes. You see, we are trying not to limit it. We're not trying to limit it. We're trying to ban it, because this thing is not. This thing is not what we are. This thing is not what we want in our society. Now, as I was saying, yeah, okay. Even if they did consent to this harm, okay, they will still have. We still, as the government, have a responsibility to uphold its citizens. Now, yes, okay, what have I talked to you about today? The reasons why it was principally justified is because it causes third-party harm. It also causes people who are taking these actions in a concert, an event, to become harmed by it, and why we as a government need to protect them from having these harms done to them. Now, by removing the mosh pits and its devils alike, you will not only change the cultural society, such as art, music, and expression, but we will change how safe events and concerts alike are as a whole. And the government is proud to propose.
I thank the Prime Minister. Now to get the case started on the side of opposition, I invite the Leader of Opposition. Here.
Mr. Speaker, we think that music is a tool of expressions that individuals employ to express what they feel. We think that any particular forms of music is something that we appreciate within society, irrespective of how it's practiced or how it's necessarily appreciated, Mr. Speaker. What is this debate about? This debate is about the enjoyment of music, as well as the right of spectators to express themselves through the mediums of music, Mr. Speaker. We don't think that this debate is about rampant illegal activities. We don't endorse that on side of opposition, Mr. Speaker. We don't support individuals killing themselves just in the name of music. What is the stance coming from side of opposition? We think that mosh pits, the mosh pit culture contributes to the enjoyment of this particular form of music, and we think that this is a unique experience that individuals partake in because it provides an experience that is different than any other forms of musical concerts, Mr. Speaker. Before I move on, let's have some rebuttals to side opening government. Number one, on the idea of third-party harm. We don't accept this, Mr. Speaker, on an absolute basis. basis. Why? Because when you're talking about an EDM concert and individuals participate and go to these particular concerts, these are individuals that consented to any environments that may exist within those particular concerts, Mr. Speaker. We understand and we respect the choices of individuals to want to partake in this activity because it's something that they feel that will make them happy, because it's particularly different than, say, going to the opera or watching the orchestra, Mr. Speaker. But B, even though those particular scenario, we recognize that there are still regulations that you can enforce to ensure that the kind of third-party harm doesn't accrue to the most extreme basis, Mr. Speaker. But secondly, on this idea of moral lessons to young children, A, we don't think that concert organizers go out and tell children that, hey, you need to come to this concert because it's great, because there are drugs that you can achieve from this, right? And there are many instances where we discourage the ability for children to be able to partake in this culture, Mr. Speaker. A, we don't televise these EDM concerts on public TV, and we disallow children the access to watch these particular videos, Mr. Speaker. But B, we also enforce an age limit that you have to be of the age of majority in order for you to be able to enjoy and partake in this concert with the understanding that you make this decision with full and rational consent. But 3, we also employ stringent identification checks when you enter into these concerts to ensure that individuals like Nima Lin don't get to enter that concert, Mr. Speaker, and harm other individuals within society. But lastly, even at worst case scenario, Mr. Speaker, we think that you still have a plethora of counter narratives that exist within society to induce moral lessons into children, Mr. Speaker. Parents can tell you that drugs are bad. Tharma, I'm sure your mom tried many, many times, right? We have many counter narratives that exist within society. We don't need to employ this moral responsibility onto concert organizers. Let's look at the contribution from side opening opposition before I move on, sure.
Ma'am, if you see that mosh pit culture is needed because you need to empower the idea of music as art, then you can't say that these harms don't exist, because mosh pit culture is exclusive to this art. So the harms must be defended on your side too.
Sit down. We disagree that it's only exclusive insofar to it being attributed to harm, Mr. Speaker. This is where my first substantive comes in. Why do people attend this particular cultures, Mr. Speaker? On the first level, we think that it's an enjoyment and experience of a particular unique culture. It's a unique experience that is different than any other particular form of expressions that exist within society, Mr. Speaker. Where did this culture start to begin with? It started in nightclubs, right? In Changkat or whatever that you go to drink, Mr. Speaker. It's a transpiration of what occurs, sit down, beyond your normal nights within this particular scenario. We think that once the culture started growing, this is where particular individuals within society started recognizing that this is something that we can capitalize on, that allows for a large number of individuals to be able to enjoy this particular experience. That's why they created outdoor concerts for this particular scenario, Mr. Speaker. We think that individuals who partake in this particular concerts are individuals who love that particular form of music, Mr. Speaker. Individuals who enjoy listening to EDM, I don't know, Daft Punk or any other forms of EDM, I don't really know, but these are individuals who necessarily enjoy that form of music, Mr. Speaker. We think that the contribution that the mosh pit culture provides is something that is necessarily unique. Why? The reason why concert organizers don't provide you seats for you to sit down and drink some tea while you listen to EDM concerts is because it doesn't contribute to you being able to enjoy that particular form of concert, Mr. Speaker. We think that concert organizers can still employ many forms of regulations to ensure that these particular harms on the that side of the house doesn't accrue to the highest extreme, Mr. Speaker. Because obviously side opposition is not going to say, oh no, it's going to be fine and daddy, no harm will happen to individuals. Of course we can expect some scrapes and bruises. Of course we can expect some girl to go behind and do something with other people, Mr. Speaker. But at the very least, we tell you that the extreme harms that exist on the side of government can be mitigated because we can still employ individuals like, for example, the RELA or any other particular forms of enforcement bodies to ensure that individuals don't partake in illegal activities that accrues to that highest form of the highest extreme of form, right? But what happens in the scenario where you ban this particular culture, Mr. Speaker? We think that A, people don't want to go anymore because it's something that doesn't separate them as a particular individual that enjoys this particular form of music, Mr. Speaker, because this experience is stolen from them. The harm is this. A, we think that people are limited insofar as their access to the kind of enjoyment and freedom to access music in terms of how they necessarily want, Mr. Speaker. Because we need to recognize there's a spectrum of interests that exists within society. I might enjoy certain things, Nima Lim might enjoy other things. That doesn't mean that you have to limit either one of us just because there are extreme harms that might or might not accrue at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker. But B, we think that at the very least, under our side of the house, people will be able to do it out in the open where we can employ regulations and it becomes transparent in terms of when can we weed out individuals who necessarily commit usage of drugs, Mr. Speaker, as opposed to it being opaque when it goes underground or in clubs where you can't necessarily track all of these harms, Mr. Speaker. But secondly, when's the delineation of when we ban things, Mr. Speaker? Sit down. When the harm that accrues harms individuals insofar that it reaches the extreme extent. We think that A, we allow for people to partake in activities that necessarily harm them in any other instance, right, Mr. Speaker? We allow for them to play rugby when it harms them. We allow for them to cut their hair when it harms them. We allow for them to partake in many different activities that necessarily harms as an individual. But we think that even within these particular scenarios, we still employ regulation that mitigate those harms, Mr. Speaker. But the reality here is this, that the examples that were employed under side of government are examples that are extremely extreme, Mr. Speaker. This means that those examples only exist insofar as the regulations fail or the regulations didn't necessarily work, Mr. Speaker. We don't think that every individual that loves the EDM culture goes to the concert with the intent that, hey, I want to go and listen to this music, I want to smoke whatever and go and hang out and trash other people with my friends. We think that individuals can still go and be rational and still like enjoy the concert and watch it with their friends, maybe have a beer or two, Mr. Speaker, because that's something that's legal within society, right? We don't think that you want to ban something on an absolute basis because of an extreme harm that can be mitigated under our side of the house. We're extremely proud to oppose.
I thank the Hero opposition. To meet the case side opening government, I invite the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Here.
We think the government has an active responsibility to prevent its citizens from taking unnecessary harm, especially when we consider that this is a form of entertainment, not even a necessity to begin with. This harm is easily dealt with by simply shutting down this particular section, this one part of a concert. Right? We're not, because in the end we agree with side opposition when we say people have the right to enjoy music, but we don't agree with them we don't agree with the harm that they're exposed to begin with, and that's our stance as like opening government. But let's look at some rebuttals to their points, right? Because obviously we're listening to what Keith said. First, they came up and they talked about how enjoyment and the unique experience of music is justification enough to allow mosh pits to continue. Firstly, we say this, all right? If you enjoy EDM music, if you enjoy rock music or metal or other forms of music where mosh pits are already present, we tell you, fine, buy a CD, do other things that don't necessarily contribute to yourself and other people getting harmed. But even then, we accept and understand that the idea of going to a concert is for the atmosphere to begin with, right? Yeah. But then we tell you, if the atmosphere is harmful, as the government, we cannot let people go there and actively sit down, harm yourself. Because why? Because when you do this, bear in mind the fact that no one knows what's going to happen to you when you go into a mosh pit. This unpredictable, wild nature of concerts to begin with, it provides sufficient justification and reason, and all with the drug field, the fact that drugs and alcohol and whatnot are clouding people's rationality to begin with, and we see a lack of rationality sit down in status quo. I mean, in these particular concerts in status quo, right? These particular mosh pits, that's why they're so harmful. That's why we only want to take out this particular section, because they're extremely hard to regulate. I'll talk about that in my substantives. Second rebuttal, on the other sit down, on how they came up, then they said there's minimal harm. The argument was there was harm, but there's minimal harm. Scrapes and bruises, they said. I'll tell you my substantive on tangible harms. How A, this not only harms society, but B, this harms people usually end up in hospital. People usually end up dead after the concerts like this, right? So we tell you that this isn't just a few scrapes or bruises we're talking about. This is harm on a large scale to a large group of people, to people who shouldn't even be there in the first place, youngsters as well, because they tried to tell us there was an age limit in place. That rebuttal, right? They tried to tell us there was an age limit in place. People don't get it. Let's face it, right? The fact is, people can get in with fake ID, and that's extremely widespread practice, right? So the problem with this is the younger generation is actively exposed to these harms. Not only that, they're actively partaking in the harms, and I'll tell you more about how this harms society in the long term, right? But also, let's consider this fact, right? Let's consider the fact that law enforcement, because they wanted to talk about regulation and enforcement. My second level of rebuttal to this, right? Sit down. The whole idea is concerts by themselves are hard to regulate, right? You can send an army, you can send trucks full of regular people, which is already happening in status quo, and yet we still have this problem. That is evidence to show that there's only so much that enforcement can do, given that everyone is in such a wild state to begin with. And secondly, due to the fact there's a large group of people, it's very hard to effectively track down, remove the element of danger from these mosh pits to begin with, because people already lose themselves. Sit down. They already lose themselves. They already don't know. They can't control their actions. So this is a problem, right? Because no level of enforcement is able to actively solve the problem. Two substantive points today. Firstly, on the role of the state, on how the government has a responsibility to protect its citizens and to actively remove harm, right? Firstly, we tell you this: in a country where so far the government is making significant gain on drug progress to begin with, we think that by banning this, we're taking a further step. We're sending a signal to society: this government does not condone drugs. Sit down. This government actively is going to take away the possibility. Even if we already banned drugs, right? They're already illegal. But now we're being practical about it, because enforcing a law, implementing a law is one thing, right? Secondly, the second step of action in order to really remove drugs from society is to actively crack down on places where there are drugs in the first place. What is the point of a law when there's no enforcement to begin with, right? But then even then, right, the enforcement we're talking about is just banning, effectively shutting down this particular section, this particular mosh pit. So under our paradigm, what's going to happen is this, where there are drugs involved, right? We'll just sit down, we'll just step in and effectively not allow that mosh pit to take place, right? Because, and then second level analysis, right? Because the government has a duty to shield its citizens from harm, especially drugs. Because let's deal with the two stakeholders in this debate, right? The key stakeholders. Firstly, the people who are participating in the mosh pit themselves. These people may not go into to take part in these activities knowing that they're going to be exposed to harm to begin with. Firstly, not necessarily true, because youngsters, sit down, because youngsters themselves sometimes are being dragged along by their family members, or just go for the fun of it, right? Because all they need to do is to go in with a fake ID to begin with. This exposes them to a host of harms, right? This exposes them to the harms, such as how now they themselves partake in drug use, drug and alcohol abuse to begin with, right? And then secondly, given the wild nature, and given the fact that not all of them are in control of their bodies, their rationality, sit down, all of you, given that fact, right, it is very safe to say that these youngsters are being exposed to unnecessary harm to begin with, and they don't even know what's right or wrong at this point in time. That's a further reason why, given the fact that we already try our best to implement ID and whatnot, other forms of enforcement, regulation, to make sure that people are of the age of majority before they enter, that's not successful. And given that that's not successful, we should shut this down. Yes?
I don't know where your parents take you when you go on family nights, but under your side of the house, would you also ban nightclubs?
No, we wouldn't, because it's simple, right? It's very simple. Now, even we usually penalize the organizer of a nightclub when they're found to have like young illegal people who are under the age of 18 there. And besides, we tell you, nightclubs are substantially easier to regulate and control compared to these large-scale concerts to begin with, right? Because even then, you can even though we concede and we agree that drug abuse sometimes does happen in nightclubs, we tell you, it's not, no. This happens on a far larger scale, and secondly, the nature of these concerts to begin with shows that this just shows that it is harder to regulate and it's harder to deal with the problem. So the conclusion to this point of the state, right? The government is sending a strong signal to the citizens and to society as a whole that we do not condone drug use at all on our citizens, and we're taking active steps to prevent our citizens from unnecessarily exposure to drugs. Second idea, on tangible harms, right? Right, because I've already talked to you. All right, the first harm on the music industry itself is that it gives the music industry a bad name, because now people are less likely to even go to these events in the first place. Parents are less likely to go, and this directly deals with their problem about unique enjoyment of music, because now less people are going to be able to uniquely enjoy this music, right? Because now the whole music industry suffers as a result of this. This gives the music industry a bad name. People are less likely to go to these concerts because they're so dangerous to begin with, right? So there's clear, Keith talked to you about, clear third-party harm is present here. Bear in mind that the artists themselves specifically are dismayed by it because they know it gives them a bad name. That's the conclusion to this point. The artists themselves don't condone these actions, right? Because they know what it does to the music industry. But then what does it do to the younger generation, right? Given the fact that I told you, most teens under 18 still get into these concerts because they're fake IDs and etc. They just sneak in, even though they're 16 and 17, they're not technically rational and they're not thinking like 18-year-olds, they're not at that age yet, right? Given that these people, they're still unnecessarily exposed to drugs. So because of the thrill they get at concerts, because of the fun that they're having and the sensation of getting high, they're more likely to want to revisit this experience, and this leads them into drug addiction as a whole. This leads to a host of problems. This leads to a very screwed up younger generation where all they know and all they do is all about, all they remember and their focus in life is all about drug activity, all about the fun part of it, right? So they lose their focus in life. This can lead to a host of long-term concerns, both social and economical for the country, right? So, Mr. Speaker, I've talked to you about the role of the state. I've talked to you about the tangible harms of this. We think mosh pit should be banned.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister and the debate in the opening houses. I invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here, here.
The reason why we allow vulgarity in singing or in the lyrics of people singing songs, or the reason why we allow music of ghetto culture or nudity in art, is that we respect every type of music that people want to offer in the name of freedom of expression, because we never limit any form of art that gives any form of that form of self-actualization to a particular group of people, because people will always pick and choose their favorites, and the state has no role in telling them that the type of music that you like to listen to is one that will harm you at the end of the day, because they consented and they get joy from that particular type of music. There are two substantives that I'll talk about in today's debate. Number one, why is it a bad form of segregation in terms of art? Secondly, is it really principally unjustified for this form of music as for mosh pits to be in this form of concerts? Before I move on, a few rebuttals to side opening government. Number one, what were the things that they told us? Number one, they told us that people will get harmed by it. Obviously. So what? We think that just because something has a harm to you, we don't completely ban it. The same with like mountain climbing, the same with electroconclusive therapy. We think that it gives people some form of benefit at the end of the day. It doesn't mean that the thing is good, that the government doesn't have to support it, but they don't have to ban it at the same time. They just can place multiple restrictions and mitigating factors to disallow that complete or extreme harm to accrue for these individuals to accrue at the end of the day. Have a seat, Habib. Secondly, the worst and the last thing that opening government considered was that they won't ban nightclubs. You know why? Two things. They told us first that it will be harder to regulate, and secondly, nightclubs aren't that bad anyway. This proves two things. Number one, Mr. Speaker, he concedes that EDM concerts are like nightclubs, just that these are in bigger scales. Obviously, EDM concerts or mosh pits or whatever culture that came out of concerts is a bigger scale of an expenditure of what happened from nightclubs at the end of the day, because they want to cater to a larger group of individuals, because nightclubs aren't just that fun anymore. Second thing it proves that that they are okay with regulation. It's just that the matter of whether regulation will work or not. If we prove that regulation will happen, and why these individuals or organizers will take into account regulation in this concert, this means that side opening government is already out of this debate. And I'll tell you why regulation will work. Have a seat. Number one, obviously organizers don't want to lose out on money. This is the only reason that why these people come up with these concerts anyway. Obviously, the second reason is for these individuals to have joy and whatsoever. But the first reason is the profit oriented. So they will condone to restrictions and mitigating factors that the government puts upon these individuals before they will carry out these concerts and before they get the license to carry out these concerts anyway. We think that regulation will be fine under our paradigm. We don't see a problem with that. Before I move on into my substantive show.
Regardless of whether you respect rights of people, are you okay with child porn or children being depicted naked? The reason why I'm asking this is because you cannot homogenize the benefit and then deny all the harms that comes with it.
Yeah, children are depicted in painting. We're okay with nudity. What about child porn you're talking about? Child pornography is a whole different thing. We think that nudity in art and children being depicted in art in any form of, in any way is already illegal in that circumstance, because we don't want to disallow people from disregarding any form of art in this circumstance. Pornography is a whole different debate. Firstly, why is it a bad form of segregation in terms of art? Number one, there is a group of individuals in society that have passions towards this type of music, like any type of music, like classic, like opera, whatsoever. We think that what happens now is since you ban it, you give them no choice but to do it in an illegal manner. People will come up with with underground concerts. People will come up with gatherings that are not regulated, and the situations will get even more worse. Have a seat. In states where party drugs are legal, where marijuana is legal and weed, whatever, is legal, there is a certain form of restriction or control towards these kind of things for consumers to consume it and for these people to take drugs or whatsoever. But in situations where it's an underground concert or where it's an illegal concert without restriction or without any form of control, you won't know that you won't even know when the situation will get even worse. And the situation will get even worse because now, even with some regulation, the situation is so rampant and people are dying whatsoever, but in a circumstance where people don't have any control. And we promise you that regulation will be better. Under our circumstance, these forms of things won't happen. Secondly, what are examples of this? Let's look at things like street art and ghetto culture. Since the government doesn't support and endorse these forms of music, what do? They come up with things like graffiti. They come up with things like mobs, like what happened in in Step Up. These are forms of things that will happen because these individuals don't have a choice to express and for them to show and for them to have that freedom of expression at the end of the day. That's why when the government doesn't endorse things like graffiti, they just go around painting whatever they want in any wall that they get in the street. We think that these are all individuals that are put in a box and you're not letting them come out of that box at the end of the day. And even when you are the ones that are providing within that box that I'm talking about is regulation. Secondly, what is the second substantive that I have for you? Is it really principally unjustified? Firstly, there is a delineation between any form of art and any type of music. How will this cause third-party harm to happen? We think that it's only exclusive to people that consent, number one, to go into this concert. Secondly, they enjoy this form of music. If not, why would they want to pay tons of money into going to this concert in the first place? Why would they want to waste their time? To only a particular group of individuals, and this particular group of individuals are individuals that are okay with mosh pits, that people that are okay with EDM music and know what exactly will happen in the concert. Secondly, what are other forms of art and your order? What are other forms of other forms of things that we allow in music and we don't limit the freedom of expression? As I already told you, things like nudity in art, things like people who are singing with vulgarity in their lyrics of their songs, or even people singing about their past crime life, or people singing about ghetto culture, whatsoever. These are all forms of things that we legalize in the current status quo. Why? Because we understand that is a delineation in art. We cannot place a set standard of only how you are okay, this is the only way that you have to play music, and this is the only particular group that can listen to this music. Even though we already have restrictions, like we censor them in the radio, but even though you can get it, you can buy the album whatsoever, but we don't allow everyone to see and to enjoy a particular type of music because it has some harm in it. The same reason why we don't allow sexually oriented movies in aeroplanes, because we don't want to expose them to children, or we don't want to expose them to any other particular group. Even though you're an adult and you don't like sexually oriented movies, we don't want to expose them to individuals that don't like that particular form of art or particular form of thing at the end of the day, because we think that any form of restriction can happen, and we understand that there is a delineation within everything, but that just doesn't make it that bad. We think in the name of art and in the name of music, we are fine with mosh pits and EDMs. We're very proud to oppose.
At the end of the justice opposition, get the case started in the closing houses and by the member of government. Here.
Mr. Speaker, I continuously fail to find any artistic value in mosh pits at all, especially in Avicii concerts, and especially in concerts where they don't matter to the music at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to talk to you about specifically why we can ban these mosh pits within these concerts because of many different reasons, mainly being because they are harm to other individuals that we have to concede. Now, we understand that side opening government has talked about this a little bit, but there was very little analysis. What I'll add in terms of analysis is I'll deconstruct the idea of consent and whether or not consent matters. I'll also be talking about whether or not should people be allowed to have fun, even if it's some kind of unique experience at the end of the day. I'll also talk about whether or not we allow people to hurt themselves in any situation, Mr. Speaker. Now, firstly, a couple of responses. Now, the first question I'm going to ask is because a lot of side opening opposition's cases rely on this, is the fact that is this art? Is mosh pits an art that we should credit at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker? No, not at all. Because the first thing we have to realize is that mosh pits are not correlated to the music that people go to buy into in the first place. Obviously, they exist. Obviously, you see most of them in raves, in EDM concerts, because that's where it's nice to have them. The reason why they're there is because there are tight spaces, there are individuals to bully, there are 10,000 people around so that you can easily get away without being noticed or without being checked by police officers, and they don't push people and fight and jump to the synchrony of the music, Mr. Speaker. I don't understand how it can be art that's related to the music if it's not because of the music, but because of the number of people that are there, and not because of what Avicii is saying in his speech. It's people do it because they have tight spaces and they want to just fight, right? And they can easily get with that inert fight club need to just, start pushing, fighting people. But secondly, I'm going to ask is, will people go underground and form illegal concerts? I don't think so, because there is absolutely no money in underground music. You're not going to get enough people to come to your underground concerts, Mr. Speaker. If EDM was, if this was true, Mr. Speaker, and if it is profitable, EDMs would have gone underground a long time ago when drugs were criminalized, because when people take drugs, there's better concerts or people have more fun, Mr. Speaker. The only reason Hardwell will continue going for legal concerts and to get more people to come is because they're going to make a lot more money from it. But before I move on my arguments, yes, ma'am.
Look, when the concert was cancelled later on the third day, organizers had to pay millions in reparations to the participants that already brought tickets. Why would promoters or bands still not be incentivized to partake into stringent regulations to maintain some decorum to allow for individuals to
Look, now I don't understand what you're talking about. You're telling me that it's an art that we should protect. Now you're telling me that we should regulate this art as well at the same time and form some kind of decorum. At the end of the day, even if FMFA is to lose some millions of dollars, for the period of time that they've been running in Malaysia, they've made a lot more than that, Mr. Speaker. It's a very small loss for that number of deaths that they've had. Now, what am I going to talk to you about? I think the first thing we have to realize is you have to give more descriptions to a function of a mosh pit. It's basically to facilitate random and brutal fights within the concerts in itself. It's like formations of walls of death where people pull random people in and start pushing them around, shoving them around, back and forth, unless, of course, you are able to punch them. And these tight spaces are you've done it. These tight spaces are purposefully created, Mr. Speaker. Concert organizers purposely create a very small space and sell loads of tickets to people for that small space so that they create those tight spaces that facilitate this mosh pits. We think that this is what's pernicious at the end of the day. And because of this circle, random people are drawn to it, random people are pulled into it, and complemented by drug abuse, people faint, people get severely injured because they are pushed around, and then the people who start pushing them around get lost in the crowd of 10,000 people and don't get checked at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker. There is little to no check and balance because of a huge number of people. There are no CCTVs to record you in Stadium Merdeka. If this happens, Mr. Speaker, nobody can report this, and it's disgusting that the state does not do anything about it, Mr. Speaker. There is huge third-party harm that justifies this action in the first place. And the worst part of this is that artists make money out of this whole thing, Mr. Speaker. They facilitate this idea, they facilitate these concerts by allowing it to happen and endorsing it in the first place. And they find some kind of solace and fun from allowing this to happen. We think that, but there are more important things to concern, which is the harms to other individuals who don't pay for mosh pits, who pay for the music that they go for. Now, the next thing I have to analyze is the idea of consent, right? Because we heard from opening opposition that people consent to this atmosphere. Look, people don't consent to the fact that they want to go for mosh pits. They go with the assumption that they want to avoid mosh pits and listen to the music. They don't buy into the culture of mosh pits. They buy into the culture of electronic dance music, Mr. Speaker, where they just start jumping and not necessarily pushing other people. We think that this can easily be delineated, right? Obviously, they're not going for a tea party. Obviously, they're going for some kind of aggressive dancing music, but not to the extent of aggressive pushing, hurting other individuals, or the fact that other individuals are pushing them. You can't just justify it by saying they bought a ticket, therefore they consented to being killed or hurt or severely injured, Mr. Speaker. Hardwell is Hardwell and not Fight Club. But the next thing we need to answer is, should people be allowed to have fun even if it's considered to be art, even if it's some kind of unique experience. But before that, yes, ma'am.
Why are you suddenly okay with individuals partaking in aggressive dancing, but eliminating individuals the ability to enter into concerts because they want the ability to express themselves, even if it doesn't correlate?
When I say aggressive, I mean relatively aggressive. Obviously, it's more aggressive than an Alicia Keys concert, but that relatively aggressive dancing. So, should people be allowed to have fun, Mr. Speaker? Because we think fun or enjoyment or any of this sort can only be exercised and protected if everyone has equal access to it. It's the same thing as rights. To grant more rights to everyone, you must take away some rights from some people, Mr. Speaker. That is why it's important to ban mosh pits, because people don't just go to concerts for mosh pits. They pay for the music. They don't pay to get injured, or they don't get paid to get pushed around. Only very few people pay to go into form's wall of death and express or manifest their Fight Club needs within themselves. Then the next thing we need to answer is, do we allow people to hurt themselves? Yes, sure, go ahead, hurt yourselves. I mean, play rugby if you want. But, Mr. Speaker, if it involves hurting other individuals, then that's something that the state should step in and ban. Now, the last thing that we heard is that in terms of whether music equals art culture and art culture equals mosh pits, right? We understand dancing is an art. I can buy that. Dancing is definitely an art. But mosh pits are not that same kind of art, Mr. Speaker. These guys are just going to say anything that grows on the ground, or if you throw paint on a wall is art because it just happens to be there and people express themselves at the end of the day. But that's only for a particular group of people that has no correlation whatsoever to the music that's going on, the 198 ringgit that people pay to go and see EDM, Mr. Speaker. For all those reasons, we are very proud to stand in government.
I think the member of government, you get the case that besides voting opposition and rising member of opposition.
We do acknowledge that the harms will exist in mosh pits, but we think that the harms will not be regulated and will go even worse under your side when you want to ban these certain concerts and a certain mosh pit that is going on. You cannot deny the fact that people enjoy mosh pit and people want to go for mosh pit, and that's why underground mosh pit will still continue to go on. But on the outside, when we allow them to have mosh pits, when we allow them to have mosh pits, and when you can go out to the open and people will know what's happening, this is when something goes too wrong, when people go rampant, this is when regulations can step in. But under your side, when you wanted to do it underground and you do not let the society know about it, and this is when things goes worse, when things causes a harm towards it, this is when all those harm that you want to mitigate will happen more likely under your side, because you cannot regulate these certain harms now. Because when things go underground and all these things happen, this is when the harms cannot be regulated, because the society and the laws and regulations won't be able to work, because they do not know what's happening in the mosh pits going on, because you do not want to let the society know about it, because you do not want to open it for the society to know what's happening towards it. But under your side, our side, we try to mitigate the harm happening here, because we have regulations to go on, because we allow people to go out to the mosh pits. We think that under your side, we cannot deny the fact that even if you try to ban these certain concerts and mosh pits cannot be gone completely. Mosh pits will still be able to exist, but harms will be further worse under your side when you do not want to mitigate this, when your side cannot mitigate the harms even more. When under your side, laws and enforcement will not be able to work even more under your side. We think that under our side, although even if harms exist, we think that there's regulations to regulate these certain things going on, and most importantly, it's about the consent that people consented to it, because people consented to enter this certain concert, people consented to go for this mosh pit, and they should know what's going to happen in the mosh pit. When these people consented to the mosh pits, they should know that all this fighting and taking drugs might happen. But if they still want to go for this certain mosh pits, we think that we should respect their choice and we should not infringe in their rights because they consented to do it, because they wanted to do it, so because they enjoy this certain art going on under your side. But under your side, it's for the worst, because under your side, enforcement will not be able to work, work, but under our side, we actually put effort into trying to make enforcement work when we allow them to have mosh pits openly and all. We think that mosh pits and all this kind of concert is a certain period of art where people enjoy and people go there and have fun. It's a sort of entertainment that people want to enjoy. That's why people attend this certain mosh pit concert. But when you want to ban these mosh pits, and people still enjoy and people still want to attend to it, this is when things will go underground. This is when the harms cannot be mitigated. This is when harms cannot be eliminated under your side, because this is when the laws and regulations won't be able to work because they do not know these certain things is happening. But under our side, this harm will be able to regulate it even more, and the harm will be able to mitigate it even more under our side. But you say that under our side we wouldn't have check and balance exist, but we think that check and balance won't be exist under your side when you do not want to let people know about it. You want to do it underground and do it secretly. But under our side, when you do it openly, when the society to check with it, with the laws and regulations to go on, and this is when check and balance will be able to exist. So before I move on to my extensions, a few rebuttals coming from government. Firstly, opening government came out and tell you about this third-party harm happening. Firstly, we think that when people go to the concert and people opt into this mosh pit that might happen in this concert, we tell you that this is when it will happen, and we don't think that how this third-party harm will be able to exist to do that. Because if their choice to do so, we think that it's fine to do so. But after that, sit down. We came out with this idea about how it's the state's responsibility to do so. We don't think so, because the state is really, under our side, this is when the state is actually doing the responsibility to allow mosh pits to happen, to allow them to happen, and after that, they can regulate it. Under your side, you try to mitigate this certain harm, they will sit down. You rather than a very idealistic thing and think that all mosh pits will be gone, and after that, everybody will be safe and drugs won't be able to go on anymore. But under your side, it won't be able to happen when the state is not putting the responsibility. Because under your side is when laws and enforcement won't be able to work even more on the side of government side. After they came out, we can tell you that how it creates a bad name for the music industry. We think that we don't think so, because we think that there are people that enjoy this mosh pit and think that it's piece of art. But even if after that music, it really gives a bad name to the music industry and people actually really hate mosh pit and do not want to go for this concert that has mosh pit and more, we think that's fine. This is when this mosh pit can naturally be banned because the demand is no longer there, because people no longer want to go for mosh pit. This is when it can actually be banned completely under our side. But I want to push that how the underground and secretly mosh pits will still be able to exist, because people will still want to go for it and people will still enjoy it, and this is when the harm will not be regulated. But before I move on, okay.
Ma'am, given the illegal and unregulated nature of underground concerts, people are generally deterred to go for them. Why would concert organizers go from making millions of dollars and instead opt to make thousands of dollars in underground concerts?
We think that there will still be the same amount of people and sufficient enough people to sustain what's happening in the underground concert, because the demand is still there. When you suddenly want to ban mosh pits and suddenly want to ban mosh pits, when people are so for mosh pit and want to go for mosh pit, and suddenly you ban mosh pit and do not let mosh pit happen, this is when the desire to go for mosh pits will still be there. This is when the people will still want to go, and we think that these organizations will still be able to make their money what they want. But we tell you that this is when the money will still be able to be made, but the harms will not be able to be mitigated under your side. But on that extension on what's the nature of the people going for this certain concert, we tell that this individual consented to it. When they go for this certain concert, they should know that they should already know that, acknowledge that the harm that mosh pit will happen. But if they do not want to go for this mosh pit, we are fine with it. We think that if they do not like this certain art, it's okay. But if this individual wants to opt into it and think that I enjoy this mosh pit, I'm willing to harm myself, if harms happen to me, I'm fine, I'm willing to take drugs because I enjoy this certain art, we think it's fine with it. This is when the trade-off comes out. When you consent to a certain thing, you should know what's going to harm and what are the consequences that may happen to you. But if you concede to these harms and these consequences that may happen to you as well, we think that it's fine to do so. We don't think that the state has the right to infringe into this certain right, but infringe into this art and this music art that what the audience like. If the audience enjoy this mosh pit and the people that the organization and the band and the people that opted into the concert enjoy this art and think that it's a sort of entertainment, we think it's fine. But even if it causes, but we don't think that it will cause a third party harm, because it's what the people consented to it and the people wanted to opt into this certain, opt into the concert in the first place. Okay, let's look back and see what closing opposition brought you today. We tell you about how this certain, under your side, laws and enforcement won't be able to work even more. Under your side, harm to exist even more under your side. But under our side, what happened is that we try to mitigate the harm happening when we do not want to ban them. We rather than do it openly rather than do it secretly, when laws and regulations will not be able to work anymore. Because under your side, it's when check and balance won't be able to exist. Under your side, where harms will be even worse under your side, because you do not want to regulate these certain harms, because you won't be able and you won't have the ability to regulate these certain harms under your side when they do it without the society knowing, without people knowing about it. With that, we are proud to Oppose.
Then the motion to end the case for the government to hold the head of the government when the government is
Ladies and gentlemen, I have 3 issues I'm going to be talking about today. But what I want to point out first was the nature of OO and the nature of CO, right? You had OO who came up here and wanted to talk about how everything is about like first world nation. Oh, we should be happy people have access to all these things. People should be allowed to be, say bad words in songs and sing about their past crime lives, even though 50 Cent was never a gangster, a real one, right? And then in closing opposition, you have a case that literally depicts like Somalia, like our cops don't work, we can never catch these people, drugs are rampant, you go to the corner, I got a couple of pills here, you want some? Like, I'm not sure which world they're staying in, but let's deal with 2 characterizations, right? This confusion has led to a lot of confusion in this debate. First issue I want to be talking about is the idea of how art and mosh pit culture, what is the trade-off and are we willing to make this trade-off? Secondly, what I want to talk about is that who are we rewarding? Music goers or organizers and artists, and to what extent are we willing to allow people to profit at the expense of other people being injured? And thirdly, they say they have an extension, so they say there are 2 things, right, in closing. Nature of people, that means they want to talk about consent. I'm pretty sure all talked about this, but we'll deal with it anyways. And lastly, the idea of underground music, which is basically the gist of closing opposition. Underground music will be worse because if we don't regulate them, everyone will live in Somalia. Let's deal with that. Let's deal with number 1. Art and mosh pit culture. What's the trade-off? No, thank you, ma'am. If you look at the design of opening opposition, what they wanted to tell you was that it's a unique culture. Mosh pits is when individuals want to participate in an event, and the event is a concert. So to be more attached to that concert, or to feel that fun, or to release that stress, pun intended, release stress there, yeah, you need to engage in these kinds of rowdy behavior because the exclusive benefit is the uniqueness of that culture. That's all nice words, but the reality is we detest this idea and we detest the idea of calling it a culture. We think that even in their best case scenario, if it is a culture, it is at best bad behavior that can be dealt with within concerts. Let's look at the characterization of how these mosh pits worked. Kelvin came up here and provided extremely good analysis, probably because of first-hand eyewitness accounts of how mosh pits work, right? You have people creating the wall of death, right? Pushing people in. People who may not necessarily have consented to wanting to enter these areas or these fight club arenas within concerts with music banging in the background. We think this trade-off is something that we don't want to make. You cannot come up here from side opening opposition and tell us that we are okay with people deciding to identify, analyze, and accept art for what it is. But at the same time, accrue and say that all the benefits are good, but then negate the fact that harms exist. That trade-off must exist within your case itself. So if in case, no, thank you, ma'am, if in your best case scenario, you say there are benefits, people release their stress, they have fun, they can relate to the music, you must then be able to come up and tell us why that is more important than the reality is that to engage and get these benefits, you must become rowdy. You must engage in a situation where other people may not have necessarily consented to this harm, and then they are put in harm's way. Just because you say third-party harm doesn't mean the concept doesn't go both ways on closing government, right? So let's look at the reality. This consent really exists at the opposition side because both of them wanted to talk about it. We say no. The reason for this is because of the extension that is unique that we brought up. Because we told you when you have organizers, and which goes to the second issue, yeah, who are we rewarding, organizers or the music goers? You have an extension that provides perspective of how organizers and artists profit at the expense of individuals who go there who may get hurt or who may not necessarily want to be in a situation where it is unruly or it might be dangerous to them. Why? Because the entire concept is designed that way. Of course, not everybody engages in it, but enough people engage in it to create a situation where you feel uneasy in that crowd. Why? It's tight space. Obviously, you're going to push out if you're my size, right? You're going to push out people because you don't like the fact that they're in your face. People understand the concept of personal space. Unfortunately, organizers also understand that and violate and take your personal space away to ensure that when you are in that situation, you feel uncomfortable. And when you feel uncomfortable, obviously you're going to end up fighting in a rowdy mess with a Fight Club scene where you look like Brad Pitt. That is not good, because what you are rewarding are organizers that want to profit from the situation that you are forced into. Of course, not everyone engages in it, but the people who do engage in it tend to push other people into these crowds, and they don't want to be there. That's why, Tarma, you sock the guy in the face, because you don't want to be the subject of a Fight Club on YouTube saying that this is why we should ban rave. That's why, right? That's why it should be rave concerts, because Tarma was in a fist fight in a rave concert. You don't want to, no one wants to be the center of attention of that kind of material. Closing.
If concerts are where people come and enjoy themselves, and the nature of concerts allows mosh pits to happen, why would you just ban open concerts in the first place?
Open concerts?
Or just concerts?
Okay, look, if I can't ban all concerts, because when Alicia Keys sings, nobody goes up there and punches her in the face. And when John Legend comes next week, I'm pretty sure no one's going to do that either, right? I'm on Malaysian debates, right? That's an example of a really bad POI. All right, third issue. Let's go on to the nature of people. They said about unregulated concerts, right? Let's just deal with closing opposition. And they say that, look, guys, if we don't ban it, if you don't regulate it, and you ban this, what's going to happen is it's going to go underground. It's as if Kelvin never spoke, right? He specifically came up and said, there's no money in underground music. People don't want to go. There's a disincentive to go to underground music because it's dark. No, I'm kidding. It's underground because there's no money. It's unregulated, it's unsafe, people don't feel that they are in situations where they're safe. You want to go to a place where it's fun. So under your characterization, if you feel that these concerts are places where you can release your stress, you can have as much fun as you can, then it kind of defeats and it's counterproductive for you to run the argument that it will go underground. There's a very high disincentive for this to happen because people want to be in a situation or in an environment where they feel like they can enjoy the music and at the same time dance and sing along. But if you're in underground music and the guy is going like, death to Satan, I am Satan's God, some shit like that, you're obviously not going to be, you're not going to be in a situation where you're going to enjoy like an Alicia Keys concert. Underground music does not appeal to everyone. That's why it's called underground music. So you cannot say that if we ban it, we'll force everyone to go down there. That's a major disincentive, and we don't live in Somalia. Our cops actually do work. I hope. Thank you.
Will end the debate as a whole in the case of the opposition and by the opposition came here.
It's funny how Habib comes up and keep pushing towards that we keep denying the harms that happen outside, whereas we on closing opposition already push to harms you and you yourself deny it, which is already contradictory to your own statement of accepting and denying harms here. So before I'll be talking to you about two things in regards to this debate. Firstly, in regards to the nature of concerts, whether or not because of how concerts are, it endorses mosh pits, and secondly, in regards to the people's concern, whether or not it's relevant into this bit. Before I go on to my issues, let's deal with the extension that came up in closing government. Kelvin came up saying that for some reason illegal mosh pits will never happen, illegal concerts will never happen. First response: when you ban something and the demand is there, naturally they will have something illegal going on. That's the same thing with anything you ban, even in first world nations. And because when it's going underground, naturally it cannot be endorsed. It cannot be it cannot be regulated at all, and the harms there will be further exacerbated. The understanding in regards to banning here is that when people want it and you ban it, naturally people will always find another medium for them to express themselves, especially in this case the mosh pit. So obviously underground mosh pits will happen. Now, even if underground mosh pits won't happen, there will still be harm that will be accrued in government side, and that will be, it goes nicely on to the first issue. Before I go on to the first issue, yes.
Sir, even if it's underground or above ground, where do you hide 50,000 people?
It doesn't actually matter how many people can you hide. It matters that it still exists in today's society if you continue on with government side. Now let's look at the first issue I have in today's video in regards to the nature of concerts. Side government pushed to us saying that because the nature of concerts are extremely rowdy, especially when it comes to punk rock and the EDM music, people will naturally cause a mosh pit. People will always be rowdy, they will jump, they will push, they will punch, they use drugs for some reason, and in turn all the harms are randomly accrued. Two responses in regards to this. Firstly, the mosh pits happen all because the nature of concerts is there. The nature of concerts are extremely rowdy. Firstly, and because of that, there were no, and because in status quo there's no regulation in regards to what you're able to do in a concert. That's why the mosh pits happen, and that's why the harm there are further exacerbated, which is never tried to engage with by side government. Secondly, when they push to us saying that, okay, we will not ban concerts. The concerts are naturally rowdy, even if it's Alicia Keys. I see here that government sides open concerts are there people sitting down drinking a cup of tea while watching people punk rocking like that, because apparently that's the kind of picture that they're trying to paint to us, where people cannot express themselves and enjoy the concert as much as they want. They just sit there hearing music and saying that, "Sup, okay, we'll hear tea, let's watch the music, let's see the concert, let's say." People are going to concerts all because of the rowdy nature, the atmosphere that is provided, and it is something that we on side opposition understand. The side government have dismissed this problem and never tried to engage with. Now let's look at the harm that they tried to push to us in regards to the nature of concerts when it comes to mosh pit. They said that the harms here is regards to the drug abuse and the excessive fighting. Firstly, we've already said, especially analyze more in closing opposition in regards to the regulation that is endorsed. When regulation is endorsed, we will at least control a bit of the harms and at least mitigate the harm that may happen. Even if regulation may not work, let's just say that we've already, as the government, have tried, and the government believes that the government has no right to try and infringe whatever we want to do when we want to express ourselves in a concert. Now, secondly, when it comes to the harms that they push to us, it can happen under their side because they say they're not going to ban concerts. So the rowdy nature of concerts will always allow these kinds of harms to happen. The fighting will obviously happen, even if there is no mosh pit. People will naturally want to beat the crap of another person, especially when you keep picturing that he will always punch someone for some reason. And especially when it comes to this. People in a rowdy nature will always have people in a rowdy atmosphere will always have a rowdy nature, and thus will always cause fighting. And secondly, when it comes to drugs, when you keep pushing yourself, for some reason we endorse drugs. We never endorse drugs. Drugs will also happen under their side because in concerts it's the most easiest place to smuggle drugs. That's why we already see the death of people, 12 kids dying because of drug abuse. And it's not because of mosh pits, it's because concerts are there in the first place. And we understand that. Side opposition, side government does not understand in the first place. Now let's look at what happens when you ban it. When you ban it, the underground mosh pits will come up. Because of the fact that it's demand, people will naturally want to have mosh pits, and they will find any way to do so, even if it costs a lot of money. Because naturally, when you ban something, it costs a lot more than when it's not banned. So naturally, they'll still get money anyway, even if they say that they have no incentive of doing an underground mosh pit, just because it makes not as much money as an open concert. No, sit down. Let's look at the second issue in today's debate in regards to the people's consent and whether or not it's relevant in today's debate. We on side opposition, especially in closing opposition, have pushed to you in regards to the people's consent. They've already consented towards the harms that concerts have which is especially mosh pit, where people have a rowdy nature, people will end up punching each other, and they may get into this mosh pit. When you go to a concert, naturally every kinds of terms and conditions you must accept to it, because naturally no one reads terms and conditions, but people at least agree to it, right? So at least the consent of agreeing whatever harm that is existed, even if they don't read what harm there is still still existent, and thus they will obviously understand that okay, I may get into a mosh pit, okay, might be people on drugs. We at least understand it. I'm going there on my own sake because I want to go and enjoy the atmosphere, enjoy the experience that is there in a concert. Government here, it's never cared about the people's concern. They just say that okay, you cannot harm you cannot harm other people. Whereas in fact, people have already consented that they may be harmed, they may harm others, and those people who may be harmed by others or consented that they may be harmed. Naturally, everyone who enters concert have already consented that they may accrue harm, but they never try to agree with that. They just dismiss that and never try to engage in that point. Now, I will talk to you this way. Closing opposition proves to you in regards to two things. Number one, that the harms that happen on the outside, even if harms may happen outside, it's further exacerbated under their side, or because they cannot mitigate it. Even if banning mosh pits for some weird reason may stop all the harms that happen under open concerts, the harms will happen in underground concerts and will also happen under open concerts. And secondly, we've already proved to you that the consent of people is and the people's consent here is relevant in today's debate in regards to whether or not you want to actually consent towards the harms that will happen, the harms that you may accrue in today's debate, in the concert. Now, with all these reasons, it's like closing opposition wins the debate.
I thank you. Now, please, shake hands and